The National Guard will be staying put on the U.S.'s southern border at least through summer 2023. The troop number will be capped at 2,500. Theresa Cardinal Brown is Managing Director of Immigration and Cross-Border Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Theresa, welcome.
Hi, nice to be here.
What are National Guard troops actually doing on the border?
Well, I think we need to talk about two different deployments. There is National Guards that have been federalized and are being sent by the Department of Defense. And they are there to support Customs and Border Protection. They are there at the request of the Department of Homeland Security. So they're under a federal authority, which means they can't arrest people, for example. They will be doing support duties for Customs and Border Protection. That means, sort of helping with processing and transport, maybe even repairing parts of fence or wall. Some Air National Guard may be doing air support with helicopters to help identify groups of people coming across the border. But that's the federal deployment. Then you have what Governor Abbott has done with the state National Guard in Texas, and he has invited other governors to send their troops under the governor's authority, and they do arrests at the border of people they find trespassing on private property.
Defense Secretary Austin says that the goal is for the Department of Homeland Security to develop the capability to patrol the border without DOD. Is that realistic, or do you think that they're going to be relying on federal troops for some time?
Well, the problem there is that it requires Congress to pass enough appropriations to hire additional personnel. One of the things Customs and Border Protection is looking to do is hire people that are in what they call processing coordinator positions. These are non-agent positions, but they can do some of that other, if you will, back-end stuff and free up more Border Patrol agents to be on the border doing the law enforcement duties and arrests. But Congress has to approve that, and they haven't approved as many agents as they hoped.
You mentioned the state of Texas. There's about 5,000 troops on the border. It's called Operation Lone Star. What do we know about that?
So Operation Lone Star is the name of the operation that Governor Abbott has done to deploy Texas Department of Public Safety officials as well as Texas National Guard. And as I mentioned, he's invited other governors to send troops to the border to support that effort. They are operating in state control as law enforcement. They are arresting migrants that they find on private property or other properties under trespassing charges. They have then asked that they be prosecuted in state criminal courts, although those prosecutions have not gone very well. And most of those migrants that have been arrested have also been released. Operation Lone Star, I think, also has to do with the buses that the governor has authorized to take migrants out of Texas into other cities like New York.
There hasn't been a timeline given for federal troops along the border. Do you expect this to be an indefinite solution?
So what's worth understanding here is that federalized National Guard troops have been at the U.S. Mexico border since the Obama administration. They've had almost continuous redeployments. President Trump did declare a border emergency and authorized a lot more troops. It's now been reduced, as you mentioned, to around 2,500 from what was then a much greater number. But it's been a continual deployment, and I think that's one of the reasons why the Defense Secretary is saying, hey, Congress, if this is an ongoing thing, it's not a temporary thing, you should really beef up Customs and Border Protection and Border Patrol to do these jobs rather than continually asking for Defense Department help.
And remind us what the process is for when migrants are picked up either at a border crossing or illegally. What's the process? What do they do and where do they go?
So a lot of it depends on where they come across the border and how many come at a time. And what we're seeing now is groups of hundreds of migrants arriving in relatively remote places along the border. That then requires Border Patrol to meet them at the border physically. Oftentimes they get buses to come to these remote parts of the border to take them to what are then centralized processing centers. Those who can't be returned directly to Mexico under the CDC Title 42 health order are being processed, and most are being released into the United States to await court hearings to decide if they can stay, and that's going to be 3 to 5 years away before that decision happens.
Theresa, what are the current numbers of migrants coming across, and is this a crisis point?
So in the last fiscal year that ended September 30th, there were more than 2 million encounters at the U.S. Mexico border. That includes between ports of entry and at ports of entry of people arriving, the majority of whom are trying to turn themselves in and ask for asylum. About half of those were returned to Mexico under the Title 42, and the other half were processed into the United States in one way or another. You ask if it's a crisis, I say it's been a crisis for years now. It is continuing to grow, and I think it really does require some rethinking of how we're going to manage the southern border.
And we don't have a lot of time, but what is one of your recommendations to rethink that?
So one of the recommendations is to deal with the personnel issues. I think we do need a lot more support personnel to deal with the transportation and care and processing of migrants. CBP, particularly Border Patrol, they are a law enforcement agency. They should not be a migrant handling agency, and we need to get them released back to the border to look for the criminals and the drug smugglers and the other people that we really do have concerns about. But we also need to rethink our migration management at the border, and that means different processes and infrastructure to deal with that.
All right. Well, Theresa, thank you so much for coming in. Nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.